So I went on gov.uk this week to check out the latest small boat figures. The Home Office updates these numbers every day and it's a rolling 7-day window. And when I looked, I saw something that I really wasn't expecting. From the 11th to the 17th of May, every single day was zero. So that's zero migrants, zero boats, zero crossings. And that genuinely surprised me because if you look at the Home Office own analysis, May is usually the month where crossings start to pick up. About 65% of crossings every year happen between July to December. So that's late summer into autumn when the weather is much more calmer. So by mid-May, you'd probably be expecting things to be building up, not getting flat. So I wanted to understand what was going on, and to do that properly, I had to zoom out. So not just look at the week or even the year, but look at the last decade. Look at what law has been in place, look at Brexit and what has changed since. So we have immigration, which is the visa system, and that's about who the UK lets in. Then we have asylum, which is about the small boats, so people arriving and claiming protection. Sometimes they get talked about like they're the same, but they're not. They run on different rules, they're controlled in different ways. So until we separate them, a lot of what's happening in terms of net migration, it's not really clear. So let's start with immigration, the visa side, because the headlines are pretty clear that net migration to the UK has fallen sharply. And that's from about 649,000 to 204,000. And just to be clear, net migration is the number of people living in the UK for more than 12 months minus the number of people leaving. So the drop comes from two things happening at once: fewer people arriving and more people leaving. The main drivers is fewer arrivals, especially from outside of the EU. Non-EU immigration has dropped sharply, and within that, one category stands out the most: dependents. So for family members of people on work or study visas, the number hasn't just dropped, it has collapsed. The changes are direct results of rules being tightened. And since Brexit, the UK fully controls its immigration system. Before Brexit, the EU free movement meant large parts of immigration weren't controlled through visas. After Brexit, that's changed and the government has used that control. So they've raised salary thresholds, restricted who can bring family members, and introduced things like visa break. The visa break allows visas to be refused for specific nationalities on specific routes, partly because some of these routes were later being used to claim asylum. So when ministers say we've taken back control of immigration, this is exactly what they mean in practice. The rules have changed and the numbers have come down. Now, asylum is a completely different system. Different laws, different obligations and different constraints. But both immigration and asylum were reshaped by the same moment: Brexit. Because while Brexit gave the UK control over visas, it also took something away. Before Brexit, the UK was part of something called the Dublin III regulation. The idea is that if someone travelled through Europe and then claimed asylum in the UK could return them to the first EU country they entered. So if somebody came through France, Italy or Greece, the UK didn't have to process their claim. The country did. And it worked both ways. It also allowed asylum seekers, especially children or family members, to be reunited with relatives in the UK through a legal route. But the key thing is this: it gave the UK a legal mechanism to send people back to Europe without having to access their claim here. And when Brexit happened, the system ended, at the end of 2020 to be precise. And there was no replacement agreement put in place. So overnight, the situation changed. If someone arrives in the UK now and claims asylum, the UK can't just return them to France anymore. From that point on, reaching the UK meant something different. It meant your claims would have to be processed here. And before that Dublin system fell away, there was effectively no small boat recordings in the data. So when people ask where the boats came from, they didn't just appear. The system around them changed, and that came from Brexit. So now let's talk about the asylum system itself. So if someone arrives in the UK and claims asylum, the government can't just refuse them on the spot. The claim has to be assessed. That's not political, that's legal. The UK signed the 1951 Refugee Convention, and that is also part of the European Convention on Human Rights, which sits under the Council of Europe, which is different from the EU. And the core rule is you can't send someone somewhere they'd face prosecution or serious harm. So when people ask why can't the UK just stop the boats, the legal answer is once somebody is here and claims asylum, the UK has obligations it's signed up to. But the framework is evolving. This month, the Council of Europe met and the message was quite balanced. They reaffirmed legal protections, but they also said clearly that countries have the right to control their borders and that they can explore new approaches. This includes processing asylum claims in third countries and setting up return hubs outside their territory. So the direction here is keep the legal rules, but give governments more flexibility on how they apply them. And understanding that then made me remember the whole Rwanda plan. If you can remember, the Conservatives had that Rwanda plan. It was introduced in 2022 after small boat crossings had already risen sharply following the end of the Dublin system. Now, at this point, I just want to bring up the whole phrase you may have heard of illegal migration, which has been contested, because claiming asylum itself isn't illegal under international law, even if the route somebody takes to get here might be. Now, the problem the Rwanda plan or the Rwanda policy was trying to solve is if you can't return people to the EU countries anymore and you still have to process asylum claims, then one option is don't process them in the UK at all. Process them somewhere else. That's what Rwanda was. So if somebody arrived in the UK by small boat, they would be sent to Rwanda. Their asylum claim would be processed there. And if they were granted refugee status, they would stay there, not the UK. And the logic there was to deter people. So if reaching the UK didn't mean that you would stay in the UK, the idea would be that fewer people would make that journey. Now, the plan faced legal challenges, questions over cost, questions over whether it would actually work. And after the 2024 elections, Labour scrapped it. But the problem it was trying to solve and the broader idea about processing people outside of the UK is still very much in play. As you can see from the recent meeting by the Council of Europe, they are now saying that countries can explore these new routes of processing asylum claims in third countries. So let's get back to the data. As I said, small boats crossings were basically non-existent before 2018. Then they began, then they continued to grow and peaked in 2022. They've dropped slightly, then they rose again, and by the end of 2025 was the second highest year on record. So the long-term trend was upwards, but this year, so far, it looks a bit different. The first quarter came in lower than 2025. There was about 6,000 crossings in the first 4 months of this year, but that is roughly around a 36% drop on the same period last year. So something is shifting, but obviously the caveat is this is still a quiet period. Crossings are seasonal, they pick up in summer, and just to show how quickly that can change, last year the biggest single day was on the 31st of May, and that was nearly 1,200 people in one day. So that 0 week that I mentioned in the beginning is interesting, but it's not necessarily proof of a trend yet. So what's the UK doing right now? Well, the focus is to stop crossings before they actually happen. Last month, the UK signed a 3-year deal with France, which means more patrols, more surveillance, and more interception. And the countries have also agreed to extend their one in, one out small boat policy. So if we zoom back out again, at least for me, the picture becomes a bit more clearer. As I said, immigration and asylum aren't the same thing, but they were both reshaped by Brexit. But they're now being handled in completely different ways. Immigration is about control, so who the UK lets in. Asylum is about obligation, so what the UK has to do once people arrive. That's it for today's explainer. I'll see you tomorrow.